All right, everybody, welcome back to another episode of the Discovering Multifamily podcast. I'm your host, Anthony Scandariato with Red Knight Properties. And this is episode number 73, featuring Joe Bell. This is going to be an awesome episode. Joe has some pretty interesting experience, and we're going to talk a lot about low money down, no money down strategies that we're going to evaluate and see if they're still doable during these crazy times we're living in 2020. So with that being said, I'd like to welcome Joe to the show. And Joe, he's an expert at helping real estate professionals build wealth. He's a founder at Legacy Beyond Listings, and he's also the author of the book Assets, Acquisitions, and Abundance, a guide to building true wealth and legacy through real estate. Joe is very passionate about serving every real estate professional to help them achieve, their market domination and to build wealth. And interestingly enough, Joe's also a real estate broker. And obviously he's an investor himself, and he owns some other companies as well. So he's a well-rounded guy, and he's been named top 40 under 40 actually in Alaska. So that's where he's podcasting from, which is, I believe, a 4-hour difference from the United States. And he's been featured in places in ABC, NBC, Digital Journal, Investors Place, and more. So really excited to have Joe on the show and appreciate him for coming on.
Yeah, no, thank you, Anthony. I really appreciate being here.
Awesome. So Joe, we were talking a little bit before, I hit the record button, and we were talking about how, 40-something-year-old, which is, how you classify yourself as an agent. And
that's a PR move. That's a PR move.
That's funny. I wasn't trying to make it a PR move, but so how did you're talking to me about this investment property in a weekend, and you used none of your own money. So can you tell us how that worked out and how other people can do the same?
Yeah, it's one of those scenarios where this play had been something that had been building up over years of being in the investment game, right? Typically, at least it wasn't for me. It wasn't my first property. I made one call and magically the money showed up, right? It just doesn't work that way. So this was a scenario where actually I was in Hawaii. I got the call, and it was a buddy of mine, and he's like, "Hey, I've got a friend that I coach with. He's getting ready to lose his house. I think it's coming up for foreclosure on Wednesday or Thursday," right? And I believe this was like a Friday, if I remember correctly. And I was like, "Oh shit, that's like right around the corner." So first thing we need to do is know how much they're behind, and then we need to get a check to the bank so we can delay this or stop it, whatever we need to do to kind of just prolong it. So having a Rolodex of money, right, which is what we all have, right? We all have a network full of money. We just don't typically ask the question, right, of who has money and who potentially wants to participate. And once you start focusing on that, it's a pretty big eye opener at all the access that you actually have. But we'll get to that a little later. So yeah, I made a phone call and I said, "Hey, here's the scenario. I think it was like $28,000. I need $28,000 to prolong this foreclosure." Bada bing, I found an investor. It was somebody that we've done deals with previously. We cut a check. Let's see, Monday was Columbus Day, if I'm remembering this correctly. So the banks were closed, and I had to get a check in on Tuesday before 9 a.m. Alaska time, because the bank was over on the East Coast and they cut off wire transfers. And man, it was just a mess making it happen. But essentially we were able to get that payment in. We delayed it. We ended up coming in with the full sum of funds on the back end, cash that out. I think it was probably a week and a half, 2 weeks later, and then went forward with remodeling the project. And I want to say it was roughly, I want to say it was like it was only an 8 or 9% return on that one, because we ran into some challenges along the way. But still, it was better if we had not ended up pulling the trigger on that. And here's why. in the process, right? I mean, you could throw the margin out the door, but you need some to run a business. But you could throw the margin out the door because sitting and looking into those two individuals' eyes that were going through all this stress of losing a home, not knowing what to do, and being able to tell them that it's going to be okay, right? We're going to help, and then perform on it. Sometimes that's all it is that I need to, get some gratification from participating. So that was a really cool moment. It's one of those moments where you take a step back and you go, okay, this is why I'm in this, right? Rather than being a dickhead shark investor type, like, how can I go help people? And part of the reason I do these podcasts is how can I help others jump over into the investment side of the world and start to build their wealth down the road.
Awesome. That's a really interesting story. So $28,000 to prolong the mortgage. So how large was this property? It was a single family home, I'm assuming?
Yeah, it was a single family home, 2-car garage. Let's see, it had 1, 2, 3, 4 beds, and I believe it was like 2,100 square feet. This was a couple of years ago. I mean, just a real nice home, good layout, kind of a shoebox where garages are on bottom, and then most of the living space up top. So yeah, it was pretty straightforward, 70, 80,000 in repairs, and yeah, it ended up working out.
And that you mentioned you were in Hawaii, or the property's in Hawaii?
I was in Hawaii at the time. So one thing about where we live is we live in a rainforest, which is funny being in Alaska, but we sit at the base of a ski resort. And so there are often times throughout the year when we get more rain that comes through than snow. And so we try and get out of town for those scenarios. So Hawaii is like a straight, easy 5.5 hour, boom, you walk out the plane and it's paradise. So we go over there as much as we can.
That's awesome. So, all right. So you get the call and you're working in Hawaii and you're having a good time. That's great. So, what would you kind of suggest to our audience? Like, how do they, you kind of touched on it briefly with your network and whatnot. Are there any other strategies to acquire real estate with very little money down? Especially, if you're trying to buy it by yourself or with a couple partners, and that's it. You don't really, want to get involved with too much else. But is there any other ways?
Well, there's all kinds of ways, right? I mean, it really is only limited by how you allow your brain to come up with the different scenarios. There's tons of opportunities, and I'm sure you run into it with some of the conversations around big multifamilies. You can run into owners that have had this property for 20 plus years, and it might be more beneficial for them to hook you up with an owner finance on the way out versus a straight up, close the deal out and get hammered with the taxes, right? And that burden of that lump sum coming out. So for me, it's whatever opportunity we run into. We just had a scenario where it's a dry cabin. There's like a holding tank. They do have a well on the property, but otherwise it's like this almost what I would perceive you guys down in the lower 48 might think of what Alaska looks like. It's this cabin. It's up in the mountains and surrounded by woods, and it's this rickety old rustic looking thing. Well, we ran into an owner and she had to get out of town. She was ready to go. So we ended up essentially setting up a owner finance scenario that, we put $10,000 down and our first payment isn't due until I think like February. And then we've got a year to pay it off or something along those lines. And what's neat is like the monthly overhead is so minimal versus what our market bears for, which surprised the heck out of me, that there is a market for that. But I mean, we could spend just a couple $100 every month, taking care of that deal and putting a renter in it. And then ultimately, there's a big backside when we go to sell. So it's just the different scenarios that come up. And again, this was somebody that was like, please help me figure this out. Try and untangle me out of this scenario. I don't really care if you guys benefit off of it, but just help me get to where I need to go. And that's what I love, in those scenarios. But it was also something where we didn't have to really try and hammer down a deal. It was, what works for you? Can we, talk about an owner finance? And yeah, this works. Great. Let me go find the 10,000 bucks. Let me have the back end cash out ready to go if we need to do that earlier than we expect. And bada bing, we're off and running. And now we have this really neat property. And I don't quite know what we're going to do with it just yet, but there's a market out there for it.
Right. No, and that makes a lot of sense. And in terms of, the owner financing during these current times, and I want to get your opinion on these current times as well, which, long-term, short-term view on the market, is owner financing a little bit, it sounds like you just did this deal. So is it a little more challenging or prevalent that you're coming up with those types of deals, or what's that look like, the deal?
Our market is pretty strong. I mean, traditionally around this time, end of October, we start seeing it kind of pewter off a little bit as we get into November. So it starts to get pretty quiet as it is. But, since April, we've been going really strong. It's interesting. Our inventory has dropped way down, but our sales have ticked way up. Surprised the crap out of me, to be honest. I didn't expect to have such a strong market, but you throw in the low interest rates, and now a $200,000 condo buyer can get into a $400,000 single home. And same thing with the $700,000 buyers can now jump up to $1 million home. A lot of folks are looking at those scenarios and going, man, we might not have this opportunity again, so we might as well pull the trigger. And I think everybody's kind of bored just sitting at home anyway. So why not jump into real estate or the stock market? Have some fun,
Yeah, why not? Exactly. Play with your own money.
But for me, sorry if I cut you off. For me, it's one of the scenarios where I do my best not to make predictions. I've done it in the past, and it always seems to come back and smack me in my face. So it's I look at it very short windowed. I typically don't want to make any sort of commitments longer than 12 months on a lot of what we're doing, because we're just looking at turning right now. If the right opportunity for long-term came up, then we would probably jump on it. But again, who knows what's going to happen after the 3rd of November? Who knows what's going to happen February of next year? Who knows if, some of the demolition from being closed and businesses getting hammered, who knows when that's going to exactly show up, because we haven't quite seen it just yet. So I don't want to make predictions, but what I do know is having an asset is super important as we move forward, whether that's real estate, whether that's a business, whether that's stocks, whether that's education, whether that's something within you yourself, right? And that's where I ended up coming up with the title for the book, Assets, Acquisitions, and Abundance, is really we're talking about where are your strengths. Assets, in one class are one thing, but really if you don't know what assets you possess, I foresee the next 18 months being a little bit of a challenge, because you could be playing, actually, I should say you could be purely reacting from the market versus trying to be proactive and making some steps.
Sure. Can you talk to us about your book a little bit? When did you write it, and what's it all about?
What's pretty funny is this started as a 8 bullet point segment. And then it was, okay, let's go ahead and add a little bit of meat to these bullets. Let's go ahead and do a webinar. Can you add some stories around each bullet? And next thing I know, we're like at 100 pages, and they're like, well, we should just do a book. Like, let's go ahead and write a book. And it was never on my radar at all. But essentially it is steps and mindset driven around capitalizing on the assets that you do have. So focusing on your personal strengths to then take advantage of your network to go and build up your assets in the investment term so that you can start building future wealth. And initially I came up with it as a real estate professional wanting to help other real estate professionals, because in this game, really I would probably say less than 5% of real estate professionals out there are set up for any sort of retirement without the help of a partner or other extenuating circumstances. The majority of them are running from transaction to transaction, and it's the mindset of, oh, the next deal, I'll go ahead and put some money away. Oh, the next deal, I'll start thinking about buying an investment property. Oh, next deal, kicking the can down the road. And then these 15, 20-year vets in the game, they look up one day and they go, shit, I have zero retirement. Now that next deal is painstakingly so damn important that they show up with commission breath, that everything starts to get forced and they start to kind of freak out a little bit. And I wanted to help reduce the likelihood that that was going to happen. So we came up with legacybeyondlistings.com. That's our website, because it's all about utilizing what you're good at as a real estate professional to capitalize on different opportunities and investments that come along, your way as a result of being involved at such a deep level.
Got it. What's a commission breath? That's a great term. I've never heard that before.
You haven't heard that? Oh man. Yeah, it's showing up to the conversation knowing that you really, really need that deal because you got a truck payment, you got a rent payment, you got something you got to make some money for, right? And so you're not as natural going into these conversations. It's a little bit forced so that you can lock it up and hopefully make the commission.
Awesome. No, I never heard that before, but it's a great term. And in terms of, so basically you're saying, especially for, from the real estate agent point of view, to start investing earlier, because as you know, in the industry, it's and I don't know how your brokerage works, but I know a lot of other brokerages, they don't really provide 401ks. There's no pension benefit. There's, you got to set that up yourself. So the earlier you can start, the better. So once the real estate professional community starts that process, how do they scale, number one? And then when they get to the point of scale, and they're still an agent as well, how do they start to outsource some of these, whether it's processes or management or whatnot? But at what point does it make sense for them to start outsourcing?
Yeah. So I'll start at a very base level, because the thing about, putting this book together and everything that we've put together, it applies to both real estate professionals and your normal consumer, right? For those that are interested in the real estate side of the game. So at the base level, for those real estate professionals, typically they have a little bit of an upper hand because they're already in the conversation. But let's just say somebody said, you know what, I'm going to get into real estate investment. I'm going to make the commitment. I'm going to learn, blah, 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 right? The very first thing that I would say is go and figure out how to become a resource. There are others out there that are in your same position, and real estate investment just happens to be super sexy. So it's very easy to talk about. It's very easy to attract. So start looking for different blogs, different podcasts, right? And start being a conduit for some of those resources, because not only do you help your audience, but you also help the individuals like yourself, Anthony, that are out here putting effort and energy into this stuff, right? So it's two wins. And the more that you can find really good information to pass along, the more people are going to start taking notice and going, you know what? Anthony is starting to do real estate, right? Maybe I should reach out to Anthony and see what he has going on, see what his plans are, so on and so forth, right? Because it's all about the conversation. So that's the easiest, lowest barrier of entry to jump into this. But as soon as you start picking up some momentum with some conversations, now you get to ask the question, hey, Anthony, if I happen to come across a property that I think was a really decent investment, would you want to hear about it? Right? And then from there you go, okay, cool. And would you potentially be interested in, investing your own money? Great. How much would that be? Where are you starting? Right? And so this just leads to more and more conversations. The more that you're putting it out there, the more that you're committed to jumping into real estate investments, the more conversations you start entering, and you never know where one conversation is going to take you and what level of financing it may provide. Right. So I hammer on that piece pretty hard because it's easy. right? And there's 7 billion people out there. Somebody's going to want to hear your message. You just have to be out there, talking about it a little bit. So, and then you get to this point where, as a real estate professional, you have a commission that you can utilize, you can throw into the deal as participation. So we've done that. We did that out of the gate, kind of building up, with different opportunities, throwing $7,000 commission into the mix, and then, getting paid out 12 to 15 or whatever that return was. And it just started to snowball. And that's what some of the real estate professionals out there that are in a decent financial position to be able to do so can really start capitalizing. Otherwise, you purely have to focus on your network. You've got to utilize your zone of genius to go and attract folks from your network. And that goes back to providing some sort of resources.
That makes a lot of sense. So you mentioned most of your projects have, it sounds like somewhat of a shorter term time span because you want to get the money out and then, rinse, recycle, repeat. So
Right.
What do you say to, like you mentioned, a kind of more of a veteran agent or professional, that's just looking for more passive income? Do you recommend that, they invest that commission check in different types of deals? Like, how do you advise?
Yeah. Well, each situation is different, right? So if this is a veteran agent and they actually have some investments, already, or they have some money, right? It's a whole different conversation. From there, we are looking for bigger properties. We don't get the opportunities. Actually, I should say, we typically don't look for the opportunities like what you're talking about in, a 340 unit complex or association. Up here, we talk about the 20 units, or, you might come across a 100 unit property every now and again. But realistically, I think just having your money in the market, in the asset, in the property is the most important piece of the scenario, right? And so if you're able to leverage it to a degree and participate with others, typically I see the ability to really pick up some momentum with those dollars that you're earning take place as a result of bringing maybe a couple other folks in, if you're open to that scenario. So that's what we've done with our group. We've been now focusing on the fix and flips for so long that we've got a pretty good track record. And so when I have the conversation with the individual that has 20,000, 50,000, 150,000, it's all right, where's your level of comfort? Would you be okay going into a $300,000 flip with other folks, or would you prefer we do, one-on-one, just us two going in it? And, and everybody's different. Everybody has a different philosophy and different goals. But, the majority of the time, it's all about being in the asset and, doing our best to shepherd other people's money and find the best properties for them to participate.
Great. That makes a lot of sense. And Joe, so how could people find you? How could people buy your book? How could people, what were you just drinking?
Alkaline spring water, Flow.
Flow. Do they have that over here in the States?
I don't know. I watched that damn, it's one of the Netflix shows with, what is his name? Young actor, decent looking dude. Oh, it's going to bug me. Anyway, I watched his Netflix series where he's now going out and trying to impact the world, right? And one of them was on water and the benefits of just natural water. So I got into this whole thing about trying to find natural water versus, some of the public utilities that have all the gunk in it, right?
Yeah. So anyway, so how could people find you?
So the easiest way is to go to legacybeyondlistings.com. I've got a little case study there if somebody's interested in reading more about that specific story we talked about with the 40-year-old investor. I was 39 at the time, but
oh, sorry.
Folks I was working with where they thought it'd be good to use 40, whatever. They can go to legacybeyondlistings.com. The book, Asset Acquisitions and Abundance, is on Amazon. I think it's like 99 cents for Kindle readers. And then the hard copy is up around $12 if I remember correctly. So you can find it on there as well.
Nice. Awesome. Well, definitely, I would encourage my listeners to go check out Joe's book. Definitely check out his platform. If you're interested in learning more about it, you know where to find it. Also, if you want to find a little bit more about what I do, you can go to my website, redknightproperties.com. And you can, if you want, you can reach out to me and I could put you in touch with Joe. It always helps to have some warm introductions there. So again, this is Discovering Multifamily episode 73 with Joe Bell. And again, Joe, thanks for coming on the podcast and hope to see you again soon.
Yeah, I appreciate it, Anthony. Thank you so much. Let me know how I can support you moving forward.
Excellent. Thank you.
All right.